Welcome back. We are finally going to start building our killer web page. Great. But before diving right in, we gotta have a very clear plan of exactly what we're gonna do. With a good plan, you're already halfway to a great website. Because building a website is not just writing some code. It's much more than that. It's a whole process, from complete scratch to a completely functional website. And I'm going to reveal the 7 real-world steps of that process right now. Every good website in the world needs to follow at least these 7 steps. You should definitely take some notes of these. So let's go. Start off by defining the goal of your project. This can be showing your portfolio to the world, selling an ebook, building a blog, or whatever you want. Also define your audience. Ask yourself, which is the typical user that will visit my website? This is important because you should always design with your goal and audience in mind. Once your project is defined, plan your content carefully. This includes text, images, videos, icons, etc. Remember what I told you about visual hierarchy in the web design section? It plays an important role when you start thinking about what you want on your website and what you don't. Defining the content before actually starting the design is called the content first approach. It means that you should design for the content instead of designing a web page and then filling it with some stuff. Also define the navigation and the site structure in this step. You can draw a sitemap in this step if we're talking about a bigger project. Now it's time to get inspired and think about your design. Then get the ideas out of your head. And with that I mean, sketch your ideas before you start designing. It will help you explore ideas and create a concept of what you want to build. Using pencils and paper is a great way of quickly retaining your valuable ideas. And make as many sketches as you want. But don't spend too much time perfecting anything. Once you have an initial idea, you can concentrate on the details when designing in HTML and CSS. I advise you to never ever start designing without having an idea of what you want to build. Getting inspiration is very important in this phase, and I already told you how to do that. Now, after sketching, start to design your website using all the guidelines and tips you've learned in the web design section. You will do that using HTML and CSS, which is called designing in the browser. So, designing in the browser is basically designing and developing at the same time. There are actually more and more designers leaving traditional design programs such as Photoshop and start designing in the browser, such as we are going to do. The biggest reason for this is that you can't design responsive websites in Photoshop. It also saves you tons of time. And in this phase, you'll use your sketches, content, and planning decisions you've made in steps 1, 2, and 3. This step is of course the biggest part of building a website. But don't forget, all the other steps are also very, very important. Now, before you can launch your beautiful masterpiece for the world to see it, we have to optimize its performance and for search engines such as Google. You don't want a slow website or one that no one can find, right? Your optimized website is then finally ready to launch. All you need for this is a web server that will host your website and deliver it to the world. I will later show you a way to do exactly that. But the launch of your website is not the end of the story. Now it's time to monitor your users' behavior and make some changes to your website if necessary. You should also update your content regularly in order to show your users that your website is alive. For instance, a blog can be a very great way of doing that. These steps I just showed you are so incredibly important that I also included them in the course ebook, so that you always know where to find them. Also in the ebook is the link to a document called the Periodic Table of Web Design Process, if you want an even deeper understanding of the complete web design and development process. So, make sure to check it out. Now, over the rest of the course, we're going to put these 7 real-world steps into action. After that, we will have a fully functional, beautifully designed and developed website on the internet. Excited? So let's start it. It's now time to start our project. This is so exciting. So let me introduce OmniFood to you. OmniFood is a fictional company I made up only for this course. OmniFood is a premium food delivery company devoted to bring healthy and affordable meals to people in currently 4 cities. Now, they need a new, modern and clean website that will make them look like a really professional company. And that is where we come in. We are going to do exactly that. Together, we will pretend that we were hired by OmniFood to design and develop the visual part of their website using HTML, CSS, and a little jQuery. Isn't that fun? It's like a first job. I mean, this is really cool, right? And they actually provide us with all the content that you can and should download right now from the link in the description. Now, based on what OmniFood wants from us, we will start to put the 7-step plan we discussed before in action. So, starting with step 1. As you probably remember, step 1 is all about defining the project. So the goal of the project is to show what OmniFood does, how it works, and in which city it operates in. Then, make people sign up on a subscription plan. And this is actually a pretty common project goal. And the audience for this project is busy people who don't have time to cook or don't like to cook. Simple as that. Now, step 2 was about planning the website. We will build a 1-page web page containing all the information provided by OmniFood, with a simple navigation to guide us through the page. And the content was provided by OmniFood in form of a text document and a couple of images that you already downloaded to your computer. And the navigation was also provided by OmniFood in that text document. We will look at all of that once we start building. And a sitemap is not necessary in this case because we're talking about a relatively small 1-page website here. The next step is to get inspired and sketch some ideas. Here is what I did for our project. So I will show you some sketches for the 9 different sections of the website, starting with the header and the features section. You can clearly see that I'm really bad at drawing and sketching, but I try my best because this step is really important. And as I said before, it really doesn't matter if your sketches look good or bad. We just want to get an idea of what we want to build. So these different sections I sketched here follow exactly the content OmniFood gave us. You can take a look at the document and compare it with the sketches I show you here. As we design each of these 9 sections, I will show you my sketches with greater detail. And now step 4. This is where all the fun begins. In step 4, we finally design and develop our website. This will take us from this lecture all until the end of section 6. This is because actually designing and developing the web page is of course what matters the most. So for the design, I will start by defining two essential things: colors and fonts. As for the color, I'm going with an orange tone here. We will use the flat UI colors that I showed you before to decide exactly which orange tone when we first need to use it. Remember what I said about orange earlier? It can be associated with friendliness, confidence, and courage. Well, this is exactly the kind of things I want our web page to transmit to the user in order to make him or her sign up for a subscription plan. And of course, it also looks great. Now as for the font, I showed you some great Google fonts before. We are going to use Lato. In my opinion, Lato looks really good. The semi-rounded details of the letters give the typeface a feeling of warmth, while the strong structure provides stability and seriousness. According to the designer of this font, it is male and female, serious but friendly, with the feeling of the summer. Well, given our project and its audience, it feels like this is a perfect font for our webpage. Actually, all the presentations you've been seeing in this course also use this typeface Lato. Now, having these design decisions in mind, let's finally go back to brackets and start to code our project. See you there. Welcome back. Time to go back to brackets and get our hands dirty again. I'm really excited to start building this website. In this lecture, we will start by setting everything up. So let's go. Now the first step is to actually create a nice folder structure where we keep all our files very organized and that you can later use for a much bigger project. So I'll start by creating here a new folder, and I will call this OmniFood. OmniFood. All right. So now inside of this, I will create a first folder called Resources. And inside of that folder, let me show you like this. Okay, inside of the Resources folder, we'll put a folder for our CSS files, another folder for JavaScript, where we will put all our jQuery files, then another folder for the images that we're going to use in the project, and also a folder for some data. We'll probably not need this folder, but I will include it here so you know where to put it in case you need it for some projects of your own later. And inside of this CSS folder, I will put another folder for images. And the difference between this one and the other one is that these images are going to be used by CSS, such as background images. Okay, so in the resource folders go the files that are created by us, basically. And then we have another folder here, which is called vendors. And in here we have some similar folders, again CSS, but the difference is that this folder is for CSS that was not created by us, so that we download it from the internet and use for our project. And another one for JavaScript files. And one for fonts. That's probably where our icon fonts will go. So this is a structure that is very flexible and allows us to separate the files that were created by us and files that we download from the internet, like JavaScript plugins or CSS files, such we are going to use later. Alright, so this is our folder structure. So now let's go to brackets, and back here, this is our old project. You probably remember how to open a project or create a new one. It's here, this button, and hit open folder, and it's on the desktop, OmniFood. Okay, so that is our working folder. Now let's start by creating a new HTML file, and I will save it and call it again index.html, and also a new CSS file, which I will leave empty for now. This one is again style.css. So let's create our HTML structure here, starting with the doc type. I hope you remember this. Doc type HTML. Alright, here remember what comes next. Now is the HTML element. Give it some space. And one thing we didn't do in the first project, but I'm going to do is now, is specify the length attribute. And we will say that this page is in English. Alright, inside of the HTML we have again the head and then the body, where all our main content will go. Okay, I will now include the CSS file, which is, as you probably remember, link, then rel, I want to say style sheet, then I say it's type CSS, and now I actually realized that I did a mistake here, because I want this file. You see, I put this file right here, but that's not where I want it. I want it right in our CSS folder. Right here. Great. So let me see. So as I had told you before, we have this file tree here where we can see all our files. Okay, and here it is. So I can just delete this one. So brackets allows you to use this as a file explorer. You can delete and manipulate files in here as well. So now let me establish the link between these two documents. I'll write href, and it's inside the resources, inside the CSS folder, and it's style.css. And that's it. And now I will just give it a nice title, just OmniFood for now. We can just change this later. And we will also put much more stuff here in the head section later on. Another CSS file I want to include right now is a CSS file which is called normalized CSS. And as you can see here, normalized CSS makes browsers render all elements more consistently and in line with modern standards. It precisely targets only the styles that need normalizing. So it's like a CSS reset, which makes CSS looks the same in all browsers. So I'll hit this. Now I will save this inside our project folder, OmniFood. And as I explained before, this is a file we got from the internet. It's not our file. So I'll put this inside the CSS folder in the vendors folder. All right. So let's include it here. And it actually has to go before this file. So link, again, all of this stuff, style sheet, type, and href. Now it's in the resources, CSS normalize. Great. Now the next step we do in this kind of setup process is to include the web font we chose. Do you remember? It was Lato. So I will go to Google Fonts, and it's actually right here. So this is the Lato font. See here, there are some others here. Okay, this is Lato. So these are the different styles which are available for this typeface, with the different font weights, and down here some italics. So we want to use this one. And here we got to select all the styles we want. And I want the light one and the normal, which is already selected. I don't know about the very thin, but for now I will just use this. And also the italic, this one. We don't want to use all of them because that would affect the page speed of our web page. So we will just use these one for now, and we can always select more if we need them later. So it's very, very easy. All we have to do now is to come down here and copy this link and go back to our HTML file and paste it here, and that's it. And that's because this Google font is actually just a CSS file which we use here in our project, but it's not a file that we download. It's a file that's in the internet here on the Google font server. All right, so let's make the first CSS definitions here. As you remember maybe from our first project, we should target our elements and put their margin and padding to 0. That's always the first thing that I do. And I also set the box sizing property, which we talked about before, which is border box. Alright, so now all margins and paddings are gone. And now for the HTML, we also make this basic setup so that we can get started. So the first thing, I will set the background color. No, the background color is not necessary because I want it to be white, and that's the default, so it's not necessary. But just to show you, I'll do it anyway, and we know that white is FFF. Okay, now we can set the text color for the entire project. And what I like to do is to start with black, because I know it's 0, 0, 0. And then I use the color picker, as we did before, with Command E, and choose a nice gray from here. And I will use this one, 555, which is not too dark and not too light. But if we want, we can change this later as well. And we can also set the font family. So we will use, as we said, Lato. So all we need to do to set this family is to include the CSS file, such as we did before, and then use that font name right here. Now as a second choice, as I did before, I will say this Arial. And this is what happens, for example, if the user has no internet connection for I don't know which reason. So if Lato can't be displayed, Arial will be displayed instead. And now if Arial is not available as well, then we have this CSS keyword which is sans serif. So if Lato and Arial are both not available, then any sans serif font will be used. And I will also set a font size, an overall font size for the project to 20 pixels. If that's too much, we can always put it back later. Another thing about the font is to set the font weight. I'll say font weight, and if you remember, I will go back here, we selected 100, 300 and 400, and the default that I will choose here is 300. And the last thing that I should do here is text rendering and then optimize legibility. This will make our fonts rendering in a perfect way. Okay, I think that now we're ready to start. All the setup is done. Let me just see if everything works. We'll just put in some H1 element here with OmniFoot and test the whole thing. Open a live connection as we did before. Take some time. All right, this is OmniFoot with the font we just selected and with the font size we selected and with the font color. So that was the basic setup of our project. Next, we can start to actually build the site. Let's take a small break and talk about a very important thing in modern web design: responsive web design. You have probably heard of it by now. So, in this lecture, we will set up our project so that we can easily build a responsive website. So, what is responsive web design? Building a responsive website means that that website will work well on any device and with any screen resolution. Working well means that that website is easy to read and to navigate without needing to constantly zoom in and zoom out, which is really annoying. Here are just two examples of responsive websites. You can see that they change with the browser's width, which means that they respond to the screen size, therefore the name responsive web design. According to Google, 50% of all internet traffic already happens on mobile phones, and this will even increase in the future. In fact, Google recently announced that mobile-friendly websites will be ranked higher on their search results page. So, it's really important to embrace responsive web design right now. So, there are three main ingredients to responsive web design. First is the fluid grid. In the fluid grid, all layout elements are sized in relative units, like percentages, instead of absolute units like pixels. In the CSS section, we used a static layout and defined width with pixels. Now we are leaving that behind and work with percentages. We will set up this fluid grid in a minute. And the same goes for images, so as to prevent them from displaying outside their parent elements. And finally, media queries allow us to specify different CSS rules for different browser width. With media queries, we can target different devices like mobile phones and tablets and make the website respond to their screen size. So, now that we know the main ingredients to responsive web design, let's go back to brackets and set up the fluid grid. We will then build our website using that grid in the next lectures. We will take care of the media queries part later, after building our web page. While we build the web page, it's just important that we always use the grid. Now, the fluid grid we will use in this course is based on this little responsive grid system, which claims to be spectacularly easy responsive web design. So you can build any layout you can imagine with this fluid grid. I actually made some changes that makes things easier for us and compiled everything in one file. Please go download that file from the lecture description right now. We will come back to this website later so I can show you how that grid works. So I hope you downloaded the file by now. I actually already have it here on my desktop, so I will copy it. And then we put it in the vendors folder, because once again, it's a file that we got from the internet, and then in the CSS folder. And here we go. All right. So now back to brackets. Let's include that file. I'll do it here. Again, before the style CSS, which is our CSS file. And let me just tell you another trick, which is I can, since I don't want to write all of this again, and instead of copying, which is a little annoying, I can just do duplicate, which is Command D or probably Control D on Windows. So right here, just Command D, and here we go. Because all I want to change now is this file. So I want the grid file. Right. So now the grid file is included in our project. Now let me show you how that grid works. So on this website is a little example. So all our content will be inside columns, as you can see here. And each of these group of columns is a row. So in each row we can have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, all the way to 12 columns, which all have the same width. And now as for the responsive part, if we resize the browser window, all of them shrink. And that means that they are defined with a relative width, because their width is always relative to the browser window. So they get smaller and smaller as I decrease the browser window. And that's what responsive web design is all about. And after a certain amount of width, they even stack. So when they get too small, we can't see any content in this column here, right? Then they will all stack, just like this. And our website, since we will use this grid, will do the same. Okay, so let's see the CSS file that we just included, and it's down here. Let me just open it. And if I click it twice, double click, then it appears up here in the working files. So we have a row and columns and then different spans. And each of these span will be a column. For example, this span 1 of 2 is just these columns. But don't worry, we will use that in the next lecture, and then you will understand everything, just how this works. Alright, let's get back to our HTML file. And as I said, the content will be in rows. So let's just define the row. I will simply call it row. And what I want for this row is a maximum width of 1140 pixels, just as we used in our previous project. So this is the only value that will have an absolute value in pixels. We will define all other layout margins and paddings in percentages and not in pixels. And now I also want to center this row on the web page, so all our rows will be centered. So do you remember how we did that? We'll just say margin, and then to center a container inside another container, as you remember, we set the left margin to auto and the right margin to auto. You probably also remember that we can use a shorthand to set margins, just like this: top and right and bottom and left. Alright? But there's an even simpler way of doing this. So let me show you that as well, which is we can say 0 and auto, and then top and bottom will be 0, and left and right will be auto. So let me delete this, and now this row will be centered. We can just try this out. So I'll say div and class will be row. Alright, just put this here, and let's see how this looks like. Okay, you see it's perfectly centered. So now we have everything in place, so we can start building the first section of our web page, which will be the header. So don't wait and join me in the next lecture. Hi there. Let's build the first section of our project, the header. So this is the sketch for the header as I showed you before. And on the right side is the final result that we'll get after this lecture. So we have a nice headline and 2 buttons in the middle, and at the upper part we have the OmniFood logo and the navigation on the right side. It looks really great, right? So this is what we'll learn in this section. I think it is a good idea to tell you in each of the following lectures all the new things that you're going to learn in that lecture. This way, when you want to review these lectures someday, it will be easier for you to find what you're looking for. Also, you get a feeling of what you will achieve after each lecture. Now, this is the first lecture in which we'll actually build our website. And there is already so much to learn. We'll meet new HTML elements such as header, nav, UL, and lie. We'll learn how to make a background image darker in CSS so that we can put text on it. We will learn how to make that image exactly as high as the browser viewport. And then we'll make a vertically and horizontally centered box with some text and buttons in it. And we'll actually design those buttons as well. Then we'll learn the best way to style links in CSS. And we'll even make a simple CSS3 animation with these buttons. And finally, we'll make a simple navigation. So let's waste no more time and go straight back to brackets. And so this is how we left our HTML document after the last lecture. We'll delete this, we don't need it anymore. And now we want to start building our header. And HTML actually has a nice element for us called exactly header. And this is where we will put the logo, the navigation, the hero image, the main heading, and those buttons that I showed you in the images before. Now the header element works basically like a usual div element, which means that it's a container to put some content. There are other elements like that, like nav for navigation, the footer element for the footer, the main element for the main content, etc. By using the header element instead of a simple div, we tell search engines such as Google, this is our header, and not some div element with no meaning. So this gives our container a meaning. So let's start by create the HTML that we will then later style with CSS. And for that we need our content. I hope you already downloaded it. I have it here on my desktop. So let's just put it here and unzip it. Alright, and down here we have the content. I made 3 files which have exactly the same content, one for Microsoft Word, one for the Mac app pages, and if you don't have any of those, just use this file. I will open this one, and so this is the content that we will put on our web page. And we're here at section 0, which is the header with hero image and navigation. And that's our headline, and I will just copy it because we'll need it in a minute. So back here. As I told you, we will have a vertically and horizontally centered container where that headline will be. So let's first make a div element for that container. And I will call it hero text box because this is a text box which floats over the hero image, which is the big background image. Alright, so this will be the box that we will center in a minute using some CSS. Now, that main heading that we just copied, and here it is. And now we want some buttons. And for buttons, we use the link element that we will then style with CSS to make them look like nice designed buttons. So we need the href attribute, and since we don't have anywhere to point at this moment, so we have no document where we want to link to, we put a dummy link, and that's usually made using this hash symbol. So this link points nowhere right now. So let me just get the text. It is I am hungry, and this button will later take us all the way down to the sign up section. And the second button will be show me more. So in this one, I'm just copying it here. So I'm hungry, and now I've duplicated as I showed you before with Command D or Control D. And in here goes show me more. Alright, so now let's style the whole thing using CSS. But first, let's see how it looks like. Alright, so this is what we just put on our HTML file. So let's style it here. And add a new rule here for the header. And the first thing that we're going to do is to set the background image. And in order to do that, let's go back to our folder. And we have the OmniFoot contents, and the background image that OmniFoot gave us is called hero, this hero image. So this is the image that we will use as our background image. I actually got this image from one of the resources that you can find in the course ebook. Okay, so you probably already know where to put this. It's in the resources folder, CSS, and then images, because it's a background image, and we will use it in the CSS file, from the CSS file. So now, how do we use this in CSS? It's quite simple. Just say background image, and then we use URL, img, and then the hero.jpg. So this is our image. Very easy to incorporate, right? We can even see if that's the correct image, and yeah, it is. So let's see how this looks like. Alright, now the problem that you see is that the image only fills the part that has some content here. So what we want to do now is to make this header as high as the viewport, which means from here all the way down here. So we want to fill the whole viewport with the image. So we need to set the height of the header element. And how do we do that? There's a simple trick, which is this one. We just set it to 100 view h, and this means that's 100% of the viewport. Very simple. So let's see if it worked. Alright, now the image looks like we want it. Now we have some problem here, which is this white space here, and I will tell you why this happens. This is pretty annoying. It's because of this h1 element, which has a, I will tell you this, using the Chrome developer tools as I showed you before. Let me just show you this quickly. So as you see with the orange bars, this has some margin top and bottom. And this is because of the normalize CSS file. So we have to get rid of that before we can do anything else. This is really annoying. So let me just margin 0. And now it should have been gone. Now the image doesn't look quite as we want it, right? Because it's way too zoomed in. So we have to tell the browser in some way that we want to see the whole image. And we do this using the background size. Background size, and we say cover. And also we want to have the background centered. So we use background position center. And that's much nicer. Very, very good. Now if we would resize this window, it will always find a way to let us see all the image. So now let's find a way to center this box, which has this title and those buttons that we'll style in a minute. So this is called, let me see, hero text box. We'll copy it actually and paste it here. So how do we do this? We will actually not use the responsive fluid grid that we set up before, because we want this box to be an absolutely positioned box, because that's the only way we can vertically and horizontally center it. And I will assign the width of the row, which is, if you remember, 1140 pixels. So this will look like a row because it has the same width, but it will be absolutely positioned. And in order to do that, we say we want it 50% from the top and 50% from the left. So let's see what this looks like. So 50% from the left and 50% from the top. Okay, but this looks weird, right? So we have to use a little trick here. which is with the transform property. And we use translate and then minus 50%, minus 50%. And what this does is to translate the element half of its width and of its height up and to the left. Alright, so now it is centered, it's nicely centered as we want. So it always stays in the middle here. Now as you can see, the contrast between the text and the image is way too low. For example, right here we have a very hard time to see anything. And that's what we learned right in the first section, in the web design section, that it is a bad idea to just put text on image. And we're going to use one of the solutions, which is simply make the image darker. So let's see how we can do that. So the little trick that we use here is that we'll put a linear gradient on top of the image. So this is like using two background images at the same time. So we have this linear gradient and the image that we just specified before. And in here we can say two colors. Let me start with black so that you can get the idea. And since we don't want a gradient, actually we want just a color, we make it from black to black, so from one color to the same color. Now since we don't want a complete black, we use the transparency here. And let's put it to 70% transparency. So as we saw before, when we use transparency, it changes here to this RGBA code. So I will just put the same thing here. And now we have this nice 70% transparent black color, which is on top of the hero image. And this is how it looks. Much better, right? Okay, so I think the background image here is now formatted. So let's end the first part of building our header right here. In the next video, we'll start to format the main heading here and these two buttons. Welcome back to part 2 of building the header. In this video, we'll format the content of the hero text box, so this heading and those buttons. Let's start by looking at the main heading. We should probably make it white, right? So let's go back to the H1 style here and continue to define how it should look like. So color, I will make it right, and I will specify its font size as well. Now, the basic font size of our HTML document is 20 pixels. Now, in responsive web design, we want everything to be relative. So we can say that our font size should be 200%. And then this means that our heading element will be 40 pixels, which is exactly 200% of 20 pixels, right? So if we later want to change this size, we can just change the HTML global font size, let's say to 18, and then this size will automatically decrease as well. And we will use this method for all other elements on the web page. So they will all be defined relatively to this base size of 20 pixels. And then by adjusting this, all other elements will automatically adjust their size. And 200% looks good to start with, or maybe 240%, because we really want this to be big. So let's check how it looks like. Okay, much better. Now you probably remember that I said in the design section that when we use very big headlines, we should decrease the font weight. And we will do that right now. And we should also maybe set this to uppercase, because I think it looks much better. So let's go back here and do that. And like with this, I can show you many ways to format text. So let's decrease the font weight to 300. Because usually the H1 elements come with bold formatting, and that's not what we want. And we will make it uppercase. For that we use the text transform property. Let's say uppercase. And another thing we can do is the letter spacing, so it's not so compressed, and also a word spacing, so some space between different words. All of this makes a big headline like this look much better. I can go with 3 pixels here, for example, or maybe 4. Let's see how it looks like. Okay, much better now. But now we have this ugly line break here, healthy meals, and we don't want that. So let's just break it here, so that we have goodbye junk food, and then in the next line, hello super healthy meals, right? This will be much better. So do you remember how we do that? Easy as this, just a BR element. Much better now, right? So now let's format these buttons here. First we should attribute some class to this one, and I usually call them button. And now we will have 2 kinds of buttons. The first one will be a orange button with a full orange color, and the other one will be a so-called ghost button, which will have just an outline, an orange outline, and then be transparent in the inside. And what I'll do now is to create a class for each of those buttons. Let me just show you. Button, this one will be called full, and button ghost. So I will put the common styles, like the font size and the font color and the button size. I will put these inside this button class, and then I will create a button full class, which is specifically designed for the full button, and a button ghost class, which will be specifically designed for the ghost button. Alright, so let's go back to the style file down here. So button. Now in the lecture about the box model, I told you that there were block elements and inline elements, right? Now there is also a mix between those 2 elements, which is called the inline block. And the inline block is just like an inline element, but that can have padding and margin. So the difference is that it doesn't force a line break, but you can attribute it some padding and some margin, unlike a normal inline element. And so a normal A element like this is an inline element, but we want it to be an inline block. So we can change that by using display and then say inline block. And now we can give it some padding. And let's say we want the top to have 10 pixels and on the right and the left side 30 pixels. Now do you remember, if we just put 30 and 10, then this will mean that we have 10 pixels of padding top and bottom and 30 pixels left and right. Okay? Now another thing is we also want the font weight to be 300 here. So let me check. Alright, so you see we have some padding here now and it looks good. We also have this text underline here that we need to get rid of because it's kind of ugly, you know. So we use text decoration and we want none of it. Very well, so this is the common button style. So both buttons have this in common. And now let's start with the full button. And now let's choose a color. As I told you before, we will use the flat UI tool right here. Flat UI colors. Okay, that's the one we want. So we have some oranges down here, and to me it looks like this one is the best to use in this case. So I'll just click here. And now the color is selected. So I will say that we want the background color of this button to be this color. Here we see it's a nice orange, and let me go back here, and here it is. Now it's a nice orange button. Very well, now we maybe want some border radius here, right? So we want this to be round on both sides. So we can just put a ridiculously high border radius here, like, I don't know, 200 pixels. Very well, now the text should probably be white for this button, right? Actually for both of the buttons. So let's put it right here. Color FFF is white. So very well. Now the style for the ghost button. We want the border to be orange. So we did this before. It is border. We want it to be 1 pixel, solid line, and then the color. And we will use this color here. Now you see this button is slightly bigger than this one, and there's a reason for that. If you remember from the box model, the height and the width of an element is the content plus the padding plus the border. So this element is higher because it has that 1 pixel border. So in order to make these two the same height and width, we just add that border to this button as well. And we also want some distance between this, right? And probably the best way of doing this is to add some bottom margin to this H1 element. Let's go back, and as I said, we will add this border here so that they look the same, and then some margin bottom. So this one is the margin top, right? And here we want the margin bottom like 20 pixels maybe. Now I actually don't like this white color here so much because of the color of the line. So let's make this text here orange, because it looks kind of weird, the orange line and the white text. So this here will go to the full button so that the full button is actually white, and this button down here will be orange, like the line color. Alright, so we defined how the buttons look like. Now, buttons or links in general in CSS can have different states: link, visited, active, and hover. Now link is just how the element looks in the normal state. And how do we specify this? We just put it here. This is called pseudo classes. So I just write link here. So this means the A element in its normal state. Then we have the visited state, which is how the element will look like after it has been visited. And maybe sometimes you notice that some links in some internet websites look different after you have clicked them. Now we don't want this to happen, so we say that the visited links should look just like the normal links in their normal state. So we do this here. So we say button visited. So button link and button visited have both the same style, which means they will both look the same. And we have to do the same thing down here. Button link and button full visited, and the same thing down here. Button ghost link. Alright. Now there are two different states, which is hover, when we put our mouse over a button, and the active state, which is when we click on a button. And we can specify that in CSS here. So we can say what will happen when we put the mouse on the button. And in order to do so, we say button and then hover. And we want the button to look exactly the same when we hover it or when we click on it, so when it's active. So we say button hover and button active. And what we want our buttons to do is to have a darker orange tone so that we can see some change there, right? Do you remember the tool that we used to get darker shades of a color? It is the 0 to 255 tool. Let me just copy this. And we'll use this tool, 0 to 255. Okay. So this is how it looks like. And I will paste our orange tone here. Don't need this. Alright, this is our original orange tone that we're using on our website. And now we want a darker shade. And this is very similar, so let's use this. I'll just click here, and now it's copied. So what I do now is that I say that when I put my mouse on the button, I want its background color to be this one. Alright, let's just put this code down here so that we have the normal declarations like link and visited before, and then the hover and active states. Here it's actually visited. And now let's check this out. Okay, so now our buttons change their color. Now we have some problems here, as you see. First is the text color here, and second is the border color. We see in both that there is the lighter orange color still showing here. So we have to change that as well. And in order to do so, we will have to change these classes. We'll just copy these and change the things that I want so that I don't have to write everything again. So it's hover here and active and hover and active. So I don't need this. I don't need this. So the button full should not only have this background color here, but also its border should have that color. Alright, and the same thing here for the ghost button. The difference with the ghost button is that we also want the font color to be white. So FFF here, and now it should work as we want. Great. Now this looks great, right? Now one thing, and this is a little more advanced, is that we want to have a little transition from one color to the other. So this gets just orange instantaneously, but we want to see a nice transition. And we can actually do this using just CSS. And I will just show you how. So all we need to do here is in the button class to set the transition property. And this is actually CSS3 already. So what we want to say here is that the background color should change with a transition. Let me just write it. Background color. And I will say 0.2 seconds. So what happens now is that when we hover over a link, over one of these buttons, the background color will not change instantaneously, but over a period of 0.2 seconds. And we want not only the background color to change, but also the border and also the font color. So that is all a nice smooth transition from one state to the other. So we can specify more than one property here. So we want background color to change, we want border to change for 0.2 seconds as well, and we want color to change over a period of 0.2 seconds. Right? So let's see how this works. But last thing, we also want some margins between the buttons, because they're like glued together right now. So let me just change here the full button. I will add a margin to the right. So when I say, for example, 15 pixels to the right, then the button will show this nice distance. And as you see, the transition works exactly as we planned it, right? In both buttons. So this looks much better than it did before. And yeah, you just learned how to do this. Great, right? And this closes part 2 of building the header. In the next and last part of building the header, we'll just add a simple navigation and the OmniFoot logo. See you there. Welcome back to building the header. This is part 3. Let's continue. So this already looks very good. Now what's missing here is the logo image here. We want the logo image here, and we want some simple navigation to show right here. But first of that, we see that our code has grown a little bit, and if we keep adding more and more code, we will at some point get completely lost in here. So let's make a nice code structure here so that we organize everything into logical pieces of code. And for that we will use CSS comments, and comments are like code that will not be seen by the browser. It's like invisible code. It's just for us to write something here which will not affect any of our web page. So I will just show you how. And comments in CSS are using the slash and the asterisk. And you see everything down here got gray now because I opened the comment. Now I can write something here and then close it again. And now the rest of the CSS code is back to normal. So I usually like to do it like this. I put some lines here to separate some stuff, and then I write what this code section is all about. Here I will say basic setup. Then I close this, and then another line like this here. Alright, I'll copy this so that we can put it in other styles as well. So down here I can say like these are reusable components, and this is because we will use those in all over the website. But then we have things like this one which should go into a different place. Let me just cut them and put them down here. So I will put one of the sections for each of the sections that we will build on our website. So when we later browse our code, we know exactly where to look like for different stuff. So header. So all the code for our header goes here. Now the buttons that we're going to reuse maybe in different places can stay right here. Now we'll just say that these are buttons. These are buttons, and these are headings, because you know we will maybe use some of them again later. Headings. And we can keep adding more comments like that later down the road. So now everything is nicely separated, and then we know exactly where to look for our CSS code. So we already learned a lot of stuff in this lecture, but we will go even further, because we will now put a logo and a navigation bar on top of this page. So we formatted everything inside of this content, and now let's add a nav element where the navigation and the button will go. And now to center everything inside of that navigation, I will use a row. Do you remember? We said that the row will always be centered. So this will be a row. Div. Alright. Now we want the logo to be here, and for that let me just first put the logo inside our folder. So I will go back to our contents folder, and this is the content OmniFoot provided us. And actually most of these are images, so I will just put all of them, we'll copy them and put all of them inside our images. Now I'll paste them here. Okay, except for maybe the text. I will delete the text here. And alright, great. So we want the white logo. They actually gave us two logos, a black one and a white one. And we want the white logo here because the background is so dark that the best thing to do is to use the white logo here. Now the best way to put an image, you probably remember how to do that. It's image and then source. And we already know how it is, where it is, right? So we go to resources, image, and now it should be down here somewhere. It is logo white. Alright, and now the alternative text, which we will say is just OmniFoot logo. And of course we have to give it a class so that we can format it. A logo should be just right for this. Alright, and now for the navigation. Now the navigation is usually done using a so-called unordered list. An unordered list is just like some bullet points where each bullet point will be an element of the navigation. So how do we do that? UL stands for unordered list. And let's just call it main nav. And now for each of the elements inside of an unordered list, we say LE, which means like list element. You know, each of the list elements will be a link, because that's what a navigation is all about, right? Navigation is like a collection of links. So let's see what OmniFoot had in mind for this navigation, what they want there. So they want, let me just copy this so it's easier. Just down here. I will delete it after this. So these will be links. So a element, href will be, again, it will point nowhere for now. So it will be like an empty link. So I'll use the hash sign again. And this is here food delivery. Alright. And as before, I will just duplicate this with Command D. We have 4, so duplicate it 3 times. The next one is how it works. And our cities. And sign up. Alright. Let's see. Now the image is huge. It's way too big. So let's start by formatting the image. I don't know why the unordered list isn't showing up here, but we'll see that. Okay, it's actually here. So you see these bullet points and you see those blue links. We will just format this in a minute. Let's start with the logo. So the class is called logo. So it's in the header, so I will put it right here. So logo. So logo, I think the height, the optimal height will be 100 pixels. And then the width should be determined automatically. So as before, I'll say auto here. Okay, now we want this to be floated all to the left side. So we can use the float property here and say it should be on the left side. Right, and we can actually already do some things for the main navigation. Main navigation. Just say that it should float to the right side. So this is what it looks like. So the food delivery logo is right here on this side, and the navigation is on the right side, just as we specified it before. Now we have to format this navigation, and I will show you how, and this is actually the way everyone formats their navigations. So the first thing here is in this unordered list, because main nav is an unordered list, right, is to say that we want to get rid of those bullet points. So we say list style none. Okay, and then that should do it for now. Now we want to select the LI elements inside of this. Let me show you it to you. So we want to select these. And we already learned how to do that before, right? So we say main navigation, and we want to select all LI elements inside of them. So this is how we do it. Main nav and then all LI elements inside it. And again, we want to change the way they are displayed. So they are now block elements, and we want them to be inline blocks so that they can be side by side, and we want some margin between them. Let's say we want a left margin of 40 pixels. So each of those blocks will have a margin on the left side of 40 pixels. And this is what it looks like. So the LI elements are now nicely aligned such as we want them. And now it's just time to format how the links inside of them look. In order to do that, we can even go further down and say main nav. Then we want to select the LI elements inside of them and then the A elements inside of each of the LI. Easy as that. Now we want them to be white, and such as before, we want to get rid of that text underline, so we say text decoration none. And I think it will look great if we make them uppercase. So text transform again uppercase, and then let's specify the font size as well. This shouldn't be too big because as you know, our base font size is 20 pixels, and let's say you want it to be 18 pixels. But as I said before, we will never use the unit in pixels. We want it to be 18 pixels, but expressed in percentage. So what do? We divide that 18 pixels we want by this base text size. So 18 divided by 20, which is 0.9, which is 90%. So we will just say we want the font size to 90%, and then it will give us 18 pixels. And that's how it looks like. Not bad, right? Now we probably want some distance between the logo and the top, and then center this navigation so that's here, like here on the middle of this logo. And in order to do that, we will specify a margin on the top of the logo. So margin top, let's say 20 pixels, and margin, oh, it's right here. So the main nav should have a margin top of, I don't know, 60 pixels probably. And yeah, this looks pretty great, right? It's maybe a little bit too much. I will say 55 pixels. It doesn't really matter, you know. Okay. Now, very good. One last thing is we want some hover effect right here. And one beautiful thing that we can do, that you probably saw on many websites, is to, once we hover an element, give it some border, okay? A 2-pixel border, I think would look great. So one thing that we did not yet do here is to say that this is a link. And after that, say that a visited link should look exactly the same. So this is exactly what we did with the buttons here before. So this is the link at the visited state, and now we want some hover and active states. Hover and active states. And what we want here is a nice border at the bottom. With, let's say, 2 pixels, again a solid line, and the color can be our orange color. That would look great. So our orange color is this one here, right? But we will probably use this a lot of time, so I will just make a comment here and paste it. Orange color. So each time we want it, we know where to find it. Okay? So we want this to be orange. Now, in order for this to happen, we need this border to exist before we actually hover it. But since we don't want to see it, we make it transparent. It's a nice thing we can do in CSS is we can say transparent. So it will not be visible until we actually hover it. And such as with the buttons, we want a nice transition here. And you know already how to do this. So we say transition and then the property we want to animate. So it's border bottom in this case. And again 0.2 second interval between those. So how does it look like? Okay, it works. Great. Now this doesn't look so good because we want some more space between the line and the text, right? And there's an easy way to do this, and maybe you can guess already how we will do this. It is to specify a padding for the link, and the padding is an inside space, so a space inside of the box which goes between the content and the border. So we'll add some padding to the bottom and also to the top, and we can make it, for example, 8 pixels. Let me put it up here. So we want a padding top and bottom of 8 pixels, so we put it here, and left and right 0 pixels. And I think now everything is perfect. Just check it. Alright, this looks absolutely fantastic, don't you think so? Okay, so the first section is completely designed. We have learned a lot of stuff in this section. Congratulations! You just built the first section of your real-world website. Isn't that great? This was a lot of stuff to absorb, and if you didn't understand everything right away, don't worry, you can always go back if you want. So now come with me to the next section.